The call came just after midnight, a shrill tear in the fabric of sleep. My name is Chloe, I'm 28, and that single moment was the end of my life as I knew it. A few minutes later, my twin sister, Amelia, was stumbling through the door of my Cleveland apartment. Her face was a canvas of pale shock, with ugly, darkening bruises blooming across her cheekbone and down her shoulder. She was vibrating with a terror so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room, her voice a shredded whisper as she gripped my arm. She threw scalding tea at me, Amelia said, her eyes wide and haunted. I answered a call during work hours, and she just started screaming, "You think you have any privacy?" My own fists clenched, a cold, hard rage coiling in my gut, tangled with a familiar dread. I knew this woman. I knew the shadow she cast over my sister's life, a tyrant who made it her mission to crush anyone who didn't bend to her will. I gently guided Amelia to the sofa, my fingers hovering over the angry marks on her skin. They weren't just bruises. They were the bars of a cage I hadn't been able to see clearly until this very second. Her trembling hands, her fractured voice, it all told me she wasn't just being controlled. She was trapped. A fire ignited in my chest, roaring to life. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was terrified of what this monster was capable of, what she might do next. But one thing became instantly, terrifyingly clear. I would do anything, absolutely anything, to set my sister free. This was never just about a few bruises. This was about shattering a chain I was only now beginning to understand. Something much bigger was on the horizon, a reckoning I could feel deep in my bones. What would you do if someone you loved was being held captive by fear? Tell me your story in the comments. Have you ever had to fight for your family, to stand up in a moment that could change everything? I need to know, because this was only the beginning of my fight. And trust me, you'll want to see how this particular trap unfolds. To really get why I couldn't just walk away, you have to understand us. Amelia and I were inseparable, two halves of the same soul, navigating the world as a single unit. We were 10 years old when our mom died. A car accident on a rainy Tuesday left a gaping hole in our lives that nothing could ever fill. Our dad did his best to hold us together, but his own grief was a constant, heavy shadow that fell over our little house in Cleveland. 3 years after that, he met Eleanor Vance, a publishing magnate with a smile that was all mechanics and never reached her cold, calculating eyes. I didn't trust her from the second I saw her, but my dad, bless his heart, he just saw a chance for a fresh start. They were married within a year, and our world was upended. Eleanor moved us into her sprawling, minimalist penthouse, a place that felt more like a modern art museum than a home. She owned a publishing empire, her name a brand on the spines of books and magazines across the country. Dad went to work for her, managing corporate accounts, while Amelia and I learned to navigate her silent, rigid world of unspoken rules. Don't leave a book out of place. Don't speak unless you're spoken to at her formal dinners. I bristled against it, but Amelia, who was always the gentler, softer one, she tried so hard to please her. Eleanor would call her sweet, but I saw the way her eyes followed Amelia, like a hawk circling its next meal. When I turned 17, our dad got sick. Cancer came for him fast and took him in a matter of months, leaving us as the legal wards of Eleanor. His will named her the executor of his entire estate, which included a condo downtown and a significant number of shares in her own company. I was too young and too grief-stricken to fight it, but even then I saw her game. She didn't want us. She wanted absolute control. Amelia, only 22 at the time, started working at Eleanor's firm. It was a low-paying, dead-end job sorting through manuscript submissions. As soon as I could, I moved out, put myself through college, and landed a good job as a data analyst. But I never, ever stopped watching over her. Eleanor's grip, which had always been tight, became a stranglehold after Dad died. She controlled Amelia's bank account, claiming it was for family expenses, a pot Amelia contributed to but never saw. Every single dollar my sister earned was funneled through Eleanor. I tried to stay close, to be a lifeline, but Eleanor made it nearly impossible. Phone calls were screened. My visits were always supervised, with Eleanor hovering nearby, steering the conversation. One time, I sent a desperate letter, pouring all my worries onto the page, begging Amelia to meet me somewhere, anywhere, just to talk. Eleanor intercepted it. I showed up at the penthouse, and she was standing there in the doorway, holding the torn pieces in her hand with a smug little smirk. "She doesn't need you," she said, her voice as cold and sharp as broken glass. I wanted to scream, to push past her, but Amelia was standing right behind her, her eyes fixed on the floor, completely silent. Then the emails started. They came from Amelia's work account, always short, clipped, and devoid of any personality. "I'm fine. Don't worry." I knew, with a certainty that made me sick, that those weren't her words. Eleanor was behind them, carefully crafting a facade of normalcy to keep me at bay. I saved every single one, poring over them like the data sets at my job, searching for a pattern, a crack in the wall she'd built. And I found one. It was a pattern of methodical isolation. Eleanor was systematically cutting my sister off from everyone she had ever known. She claimed it was to protect the family's reputation, but I knew better. It was about power. My Aunt Carol, our mom's sister, tried her best to help. She lived an hour away in a cozy little house in Lakewood, filled with books and the smell of baking. I'd visit her, always hoping I could convince Amelia to come with me, but Eleanor always had a ready-made excuse. "She's far too busy with a new project," she'd say, or "she's not feeling well, she needs her rest." Carol saw right through it. "That woman is poison, Chloe," she told me once, her voice low and serious. "Your sister is caught in her web." I nodded, a lump of helpless frustration in my throat. I knew she was right, but I had no idea how to break her free. Years trickled by, and the chasm between me and my sister grew wider. I'd lie awake at night, replaying memories of us as kids, laughing in the sprinkler in our backyard, sharing secrets under the covers. She was my mirror, my other half. Losing her to Eleanor felt like I was losing a part of myself. So I kept digging, tracking Eleanor's corporate moves through public records and company filings. The woman was ruthless, firing longtime employees who questioned her, suing rivals into oblivion. Amelia was no match for that kind of calculated cruelty. About 2 years ago, I got a rare chance to see her at a company gala. I drove to the venue, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. She looked so much thinner than I remembered, her smile stretched tight and forced. Eleanor was glued to her side, a proprietary hand on Amelia's shoulder that was clearly a warning. I tried to talk to her, to ask her if she was okay, but Eleanor cut in, smoothly steering Amelia away. "Family business," she said with a dismissive wave, turning her back on me. I left that event with a fire of pure fury burning in my chest. I knew then that Eleanor wasn't just controlling Amelia's life. She was systematically breaking her spirit. So that night, in my apartment, after Amelia showed up bruised and broken, all those memories came flooding back. Every fake email, every torn-up letter, every single missed chance to pull her out of that hell. I couldn't let Eleanor win. My sister deserved so much more than a life spent cowering under that woman's thumb. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had something much stronger. I had the promise I'd made to myself as a little girl, the day we lost our mom, that I would always, always protect my sister. No matter what it took, I was going to bring her home. My suspicion finally solidified into cold, hard certainty about 6 months ago. I'd been trying to reach Amelia, but her replies, when they came at all, were like ghosts. Short, empty, completely unlike her. She'd stopped seeing her old friends. Her social media, once full of art and books, had gone completely silent. I happened to see her name on a list for a local community arts event, and my heart leaped. But when I called the center to ask about it, the woman on the other end answered. "Oh, she's far too busy," Eleanor's sharp voice cut in. "Don't bother her." The line went dead. I hung up, my stomach twisting into a tight, painful knot. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong, and I couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. I started watching her more closely, analyzing everything. Amelia's emails, those curt little "I'm fine" notes, only ever came from her work account now. She'd never been the type to flake on plans, but now she did, constantly, always with a vague excuse. "Work's been hectic," she'd write, or "I'm just too tired." I'd look at old photos of us, and I'd see her in the background, constantly checking her phone, her eyes darting around as if she was waiting for a reprimand. I tried calling her personal number, but it always went straight to voicemail. Then one day, Eleanor picked it up instead. "She doesn't need these distractions," she snapped, and the call ended. I just stared at my phone, my pulse hammering in my ears. This wasn't just control anymore. This was a complete lockdown. I had to see her in person to know the truth for myself. The West Side Market in Cleveland was my only chance. It was a bustling, chaotic place where I knew she used to shop for fresh vegetables every Saturday morning. I drove the 15 minutes from my apartment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The market was a symphony of sounds and smells, vendors shouting, people chattering. I finally found her near a produce stall, her head bowed, a wicker basket in her hand. She looked even thinner up close, her posture hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. I called her name, softly, and her whole body went rigid. Her hand jerked to the collar of her shirt, pulling it up over her neck in a furtive, telling gesture. My heart sank. She was hiding something. I stepped closer, keeping my voice low and gentle. "Hey, it's me," I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. Her eyes, wide with a flash of panic, flickered up to mine and softened for a fraction of a second. "Oh, you're here," she mumbled, but her hands were trembling. Before I could say another word, her phone buzzed. She flinched, answering it instantly. "Yes, I'm just buying vegetables," she said, her voice small and subservient. "No, I'm alone." I could hear the sharp, commanding edge in the caller's tone, even from a few feet away. It was her. Amelia hung up, her fingers clutching the phone like it was a lifeline. When she turned back to me, I saw it. A raw, red mark on her neck, angry and inflamed, like a chain had been digging into her skin. It wasn't a bruise, not like the ones I'd see later in my apartment. This was different. This looked deliberate. "What is that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, pointing at the mark. She yanked her collar higher, her face draining of all color. "It's nothing," she said, way too fast. "Just a scratch." But her eyes betrayed her, darting away, filled with a familiar shame. I wanted so badly to just grab her, to pull her out of there, but I knew she would run. She wasn't just scared of Eleanor, she was terrified of what would happen if she tried to fight back. I pressed gently, asking about work, about home. She gave me short, clipped answers, her voice flat and robotic. "Everything's fine," she said, but it sounded like a line she had rehearsed 1,000 times. That's when I noticed her glance at a nearby security camera, one of those small, discreet domes that businesses use. It wasn't one of the markets. It had a small logo on it, the same logo from the V-shaped branding of Vance Publishing. My blood ran cold. Eleanor wasn't just watching her at home. She was tracking her in public. That camera explained everything: her fear, the constant checking of her phone, her hunched, defeated shoulders. I tried to keep her talking, but she cut me off. "I have to go," she said, her voice suddenly urgent. "She'll know if I'm late." She grabbed her basket and practically melted into the crowd, leaving me standing there, my mind spinning. I drove home, replaying every single detail in my head: the mark, the camera, her trembling voice. As soon as I got back, I pulled up my laptop and started digging through Vance Publishing's public records. And there it was, buried deep in a vendor contract, a purchase order for high-end surveillance equipment, signed by Eleanor Vance herself. She'd had cameras installed in the office, maybe even on my sister's desk. This wasn't just paranoia. It was a system. A cage meticulously designed and built to keep her in line. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of the red mark on her neck was burned into my mind, a horrifying warning of something far worse than I had ever imagined. I thought back to Aunt Carol's words about Eleanor's web. This wasn't about money or reputation anymore. Eleanor Vance was breaking my sister piece by piece, and I had been missing the signs for far too long. I opened a notebook and started jotting down every clue: the emails, the phone calls, the camera, the mark. I didn't have hard proof yet, not the kind that would stand up in court. but I had enough to know that my sister was in grave danger. I had to act. I had to find a way to get her out before Eleanor's control turned into something even darker, something irreversible. The morning after she showed up at my door, the full, horrifying truth finally came out. We sat at my small kitchen table, Amelia's hands wrapped tightly around a mug of coffee, as if trying to absorb its warmth. She spoke in hushed whispers, her eyes constantly darting towards the door as if Eleanor might materialize out of thin air. "She hits me for anything," she said, her voice finally breaking. "Misplacing a file, taking too long on a break. She says she'll ruin me, Chloe. That she'll take everything and leave me with nothing." My jaw was so tight it ached. She then described an app on her phone, one that tracked her every move, sending alerts to Eleanor if she ever strayed from a pre-approved route between the penthouse and the office. "She checks it all the time," Amelia added, her fingers trembling so badly the coffee sloshed over the rim of her mug. I felt physically sick, a wave of nausea washing over me as I realized just how deep and insidious Eleanor's control ran. I couldn't just pull her out of there. Eleanor would hunt her down, dismantle her life with a few phone calls. We needed proof. Something undeniable that would expose Eleanor for the monster she was. And then an idea sparked in my mind. It was risky, wild, but it just might work. "What if I took your place?" I said, my voice steady despite the frantic beating of my heart. "We're twins, Amelia. I could pretend to be you. Get close to her, record her threats." Amelia's eyes widened, fresh terror flashing across her face. "She'll know," she whispered. "She notices every little thing." I reached across the table and took her hand, squeezing it tight. I promised her I would keep her safe, that I could do this. After a long, silent moment, she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Her trust in me was finally outweighing her terror. To pull this off, I needed help. I called Maya Singh, my old college friend. She was a brilliant lawyer who now specialized in domestic abuse cases, a woman who had taken down powerful men before. She answered on the first ring, her voice sharp with concern as I laid out the situation. "We have to be smart about this," Chloe, Maya said, her mind already working. "A woman like Eleanor is cunning. She'll spot a fake if we're even the slightest bit sloppy." We met at a quiet diner on the outskirts of Cleveland, far from any prying eyes. Maya laid out a plan. We would convince Eleanor that Amelia was attending a mandatory, intensive therapy retreat in Grand Rapids, a tower drive away. In reality, Amelia would be hiding out at Aunt Carol's house in Lakewood, completely off Eleanor's grid. Maya's connections made it all feel terrifyingly real. She drafted a letter from a fictitious therapist, complete with a forged professional letterhead, stating that Amelia required immediate, intensive sessions for work-related stress and burnout. She even arranged for a burner phone that would periodically send fake location pings to Eleanor's tracking app, making it look for all the world like Amelia was in Grand Rapids. I was in awe, but Maya just waved it off. "I've dealt with worse," she said, her eyes glinting with a fierce determination I knew well. We agreed that Aunt Carol would keep Amelia completely out of sight. Her cozy home in Lakewood would be a quiet, safe refuge. Carol had always been our anchor, and when I called to explain the plan, she didn't hesitate for a second. "Bring her to me," she said, her voice warm but firm as steel. "She'll be safe here." With Amelia's escape route secured, I focused on the hardest part, becoming her. We spent hours in my apartment, Amelia teaching me all the small, subconscious things Eleanor scrutinized. The way she tilted her head when she was nervous, the soft, hesitant cadence of her voice when she was under pressure. I practiced her looping signature over and over, mimicking her handwriting from old birthday cards until it was a perfect match. Amelia gave me her old laptop, a clunky thing she'd used at work before Eleanor had upgraded it for her. "There might be something on it," she said, her voice tinged with a sliver of hope. I plugged it in, my data analysis skills kicking into high gear. The hard drive was a treasure trove, old emails, work schedules, even a few locked files that I knew I'd need time to crack. I backed up the entire drive onto a secure USB, knowing that every single byte could be a weapon against Eleanor. Maya and I worked out the recording plan. She gave me a discreet app for my phone, one that could capture audio without lighting up the screen. Get her talking, Chloe, Maya instructed. Get her angry, unfiltered. That's what we need for a conviction. I knotted my stomach, which was churning with a mixture of fear and adrenaline at the thought of facing Eleanor as my sister. We tested the app, my voice coming through crystal clear in the playback. I memorized Amelia's work routines, arrive at 8 sharp, sort manuscript submissions by 10, lunch at noon, no exceptions. Any deviation, and I knew Eleanor would pounce. The final step was getting Amelia out. Maya drove her to Lakewood at dawn, the burner phone already pinging from its new location in Grand Rapids. I watched them leave, my heart pounding a frantic tattoo against my ribs. Amelia hugged me, her grip tight and desperate. "Be careful," she whispered into my ear. I just nodded, promising her I would bring her back her freedom. Alone in my apartment, I got to work. I dyed my hair to match hers, a subtle shade of blonde just a touch lighter than my own. I slipped on her work badge, her jacket, and practiced her nervous, hesitant smile in the mirror. The reflection that stared back at me had my sister's face, but my eyes held a resolve that was all my own. I was ready. I was ready to step into the trap and turn Eleanor's own game against her. Stepping into Eleanor's penthouse felt like walking into a beautiful, sterile prison. The historic building in downtown Cleveland, with its polished concrete floors and floor-to-ceiling windows, was a cage dressed up in architectural luxury. I wore my sister's clothes, her Vance Publishing badge clipped to my blouse, and her nervous, placating smile plastered on my face. For 3 days, I lived her life, and every single move I made was calculated to avoid Eleanor's tyrannical wrath. Her rules were ironclad, and her eyes were always watching. I wasn't just playing a role, I was walking a tightrope over a canyon. My days began at dawn. Eleanor demanded that I sort incoming manuscript submissions in her home office, a mind-numbing task that took hours. I stood there, arranging piles by genre and agent, my legs aching from the strain. One morning, I accidentally placed a promising sci-fi novel in the fantasy pile. Eleanor loomed over my shoulder, her voice like a shard of ice. "My Amelia has to be better than that," she said, her lips curling into a sneer. I mumbled an apology, deliberately forcing my voice to quiver just like my sister's. She just stared, her gaze boring into me for a long, uncomfortable moment before turning away. My pulse hammered in my chest. I couldn't afford a single slip. At night, the controls somehow tightened even more. My phone buzzed with a message from her. "The tracking app shows you weren't in your room at 9:32 p.m. Explain." I froze. I'd stepped into the hallway for a moment to stretch, trying to mimic the defeated slouch Amelia always had. I typed back, my fingers shaking. I was just getting a glass of water. Her reply was instantaneous. "Next time, ask." I sank onto the bed, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. She wasn't just monitoring my sister, she was chaining her to every second of the day. The worst moment came when I found the camera. On my second night, I noticed a faint pinprick of red light in the corner of my sister's room, cleverly hidden behind a framed piece of abstract art. It was tiny, wired to blend in with the decor, but it was unmistakably a camera lens. My stomach churned with a fresh wave of horror. Eleanor wasn't satisfied with a tracking app. She had eyes inside the walls. I forced myself to act normal, going through the motions of brushing my hair, folding clothes, doing anything to avoid arousing suspicion. But that tiny lens felt like her stare, relentless and invasive, stripping away what little courage I had left. Eleanor's scrutiny grew sharper. On the 4th day, I answered a question about a printing schedule too quickly, my tone coming out steady instead of timid. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "You sound different," she said, her voice low, almost a growl. My heart slammed against my ribs. I coughed, deliberately softening my words. "I'm just tired," I said, dropping my gaze to the floor the way Amelia always would. She watched me for a long, tense moment, then finally gave a curt nod, but the seed of doubt was planted, and I could feel it lingering in her expression. I cursed myself silently. My acting had to be flawless, or this entire plan would collapse. To survive, I leaned into my sister's routines. I memorized her daily schedule: breakfast at 7, emails by 8, no personal calls ever. I practiced her hesitations, the way she would pause for a beat before speaking, as if bracing for a reprimand. Eleanor tested me constantly, firing off random questions about past projects or obscure family events. I answered them carefully, drawing on the stories Amelia had told me, my data analyst brain cataloging every detail for later use. But each interaction was a minefield. Once, I almost signed my own name on a delivery form, catching myself just in time. My hands shook as I scribbled out the mistake, feeling Eleanor's shadow hovering over my shoulder. The pressure was suffocating, but I couldn't stop. I was in there to gather evidence, to turn Eleanor's own cruelty against her. Every night, after I was sure she was asleep, I'd whisper updates into the recording app Maya had given me, hiding the phone under my pillow. I described the manuscript sorting, the controlling text messages, the hidden camera, my voice barely audible. I knew it wasn't enough yet. Maya needed something concrete, a direct confession. But the longer I stayed, the more I understood my sister's paralyzing fear. This wasn't a home. It was a battlefield, and every moment was a desperate fight to remain unseen. By the 5th day, I was fraying at the edges. Eleanor's suspicion hadn't faded. She started hovering even closer, commenting on my posture, my word choices. "Amelia doesn't slouch like that," she said once, her tone icy. I instantly adjusted, my muscles screaming from the constant effort of mimicking my sister's defeated stance. My mind raced, replaying Maya's advice. Stay calm. Stay hidden. But the camera's little red light blinked in my peripheral vision, a constant, glowing reminder that one wrong move could bring everything crashing down. I clung to the thought of Amelia, safe with Aunt Carol, her entire future depending on my success. I wasn't just fighting for proof anymore. I was fighting to keep my sister's spirit from being completely extinguished, to prove that Eleanor's suffocating control could be broken. Each day, I felt her fear seeping into my own bones, but I pushed it down, replacing it with cold resolve. I had to stay sharp. I had to outsmart her before she completely unraveled me. The trap was set, but I was the one walking its jagged edges, always just one step away from falling in. On the 3rd night, I slipped into Eleanor's study. The penthouse was dead silent, the air thick with her presence even in sleep. I had waited, listening, until I could hear the steady rhythm of her breathing through her bedroom door. My sister's badge was a cold weight around my neck, a fragile shield as I crept across the polished floor. The study was a fortress of control, locked filing cabinets, neatly stacked files, and a sleek, expensive laptop on the massive oak desk. I pulled the USB from my pocket, my hands surprisingly steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. This was it. This was my chance to pull back the curtain and unravel her secrets. I powered on the laptop, its glow harsh in the darkness. The password was a hurdle, but Amelia had told me enough about her old work codes and Eleanor's habits. I typed in a variation of her employee ID, holding my breath. The desktop unlocked, revealing folders labeled with cold, corporate precision. One caught my eye, Amelia_records. I clicked it, and my stomach twisted. The screen filled with photos of my sister. Amelia at work, Amelia in the penthouse, Amelia looking out the window, Amelia sleeping. There were audio clips, her voice trembling in recorded conversations, and screenshots of threatening text messages. Disobey again, and you'll lose everything. My hands shook as I dragged the folder to the USB, the progress bar crawling at an agonizingly slow pace. A floorboard creaked in the hallway, and my heart stopped. I froze, the USB still plugged in, as Eleanor's soft footsteps shuffled closer. I yanked the drive out, slamming the laptop shut just as the study door swung open. She stood there, a sharp silhouette against the dim hallway light. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. I forced my sister's timid tone, stammering I was just checking a work email. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the desk. I clutched the USB in my fist, the metal digging into my palm, praying she wouldn't see it. After a tense, silent moment that stretched for an eternity, she just muttered, "Go to bed," and turned away. I exhaled, my legs feeling like jelly. I had escaped. For now, back in Amelia's room, I tackled the tracking app. I'd memorized its interface from her descriptions, a program that logged her every move. Using a workaround Maya had taught me, I was able to disable it for 30 minutes, giving me a precious window to move freely. I tested it, stepping out into the hallway without triggering an alert. The freedom was fleeting, but it was something. I knew I needed more than just files. I needed Eleanor's own words, raw and undeniable. The next morning, I set my phone to record, the app hidden behind a fake home screen. Eleanor was in a foul mood, pacing the office as I sorted invoices. She started snapping about a delayed print run, her voice rising with every word. "You think you can betray me?" she shouted, slamming a heavy folder onto the desk right next to me. "I made you, and I can break you." I kept my head down, giving my sister's signature nervous nod, but inside, my heart was racing. The app was catching every single word. She ranted for a full 10 minutes, her threats becoming more and more explicit, promising to ruin Amelia's reputation, to drain her accounts, to make sure she never worked again. When she finally stormed out, I stopped the recording, my hands trembling with the weight of what I had just captured. I met Maya at a small coffee shop 20 minutes from the penthouse, slipping her the USB and playing the audio file for her. She listened through her earbuds, her expression growing grimmer by the second. "This is damning, Chloe," she said, "but it's not enough for a surefire conviction." She could claim it was a private argument, taken out of context. We need her to admit it publicly, where she can't twist the narrative. She suggested the company's upcoming annual publishing launch, a high-profile gala with media, authors, and investors. "Play the recording there," she urged, "in front of everyone. It'll force her hand." The idea was terrifyingly bold, but I knew she was right. If Eleanor even suspected what I was doing, she would destroy us both. But I nodded, my resolve hardening into steel. This was for Amelia. Maya and I planned the execution down to the second. The gala was in 2 days, held at a downtown Cleveland venue. I would pose as Amelia, working the guest list to blend in. Maya would infiltrate the event as a journalist, ensuring the main audio system was accessible. We would override the presentation music with my recording, letting Eleanor's own voice echo through the massive hall. I memorized the venue's layout from blueprints I found online, noting every exit in case things went south. Maya arranged for a backup plan, a live stream to a friendly news outlet if security tried to intervene. "She won't walk away from this clean," Maya promised, her eyes fierce. Back at the penthouse, I prepared for the final gamble. I rehearsed Amelia's mannerisms, perfecting her hesitant smile, her soft-spoken apologies. I hid the USB drive in a hidden seam of my sister's jacket, just in case Eleanor decided to search her room. The camera in the corner blinked its constant, menacing threat, but I moved carefully, staying just out of its gaze. Eleanor's suspicion hadn't faded. She watched me closer than ever, her comments growing sharper. "You're too quiet today," she said once, her tone probing. I mumbled an excuse about a headache, my pulse spiking, knowing that a single misstep could unravel everything. The weight of the plan pressed down on me. I wasn't just risking my own exposure. I was risking Amelia's future, Aunt Carol's safety, and Maya's career. If Eleanor caught me before the gala, her retaliation would be swift and merciless. I thought of my sister, hiding in Lakewood, her trust in the absolute. I couldn't fail her. Late that night, I whispered one last time into the recording app, documenting every threat, every moment of Eleanor's control. The files were my lifeline, but the gala was the battlefield. I had to be ready to face her, to turn her own words into the very trap that would finally set my sister free. At Eleanor Vance's annual publishing gala, everything finally exploded. The downtown Cleveland Convention Center was buzzing with energy, a sea of investors, acclaimed authors, and reporters, their chatter nearly drowned out by pulsing electronic music. I stood backstage, still posing as Amelia, her employee badge pinned to my simple black dress, my heart hammering against my ribs. The USB drive with the recording was a heavy weight in my pocket, a constant reminder of the monumental risk I was about to take. Across the room, Maya, perfectly disguised as a journalist with a press pass, gave me a subtle nod from her position near the sound booth, her camera ready. The plan was brutally simple: play Eleanor's own words for the entire world to hear. The show began with authors taking the stage to read from their new books. Finally, Eleanor walked to the podium, her smile polished to a high sheen, her voice commanding and confident as she praised her brand, her vision, her success. I waited, my fingers brushing against the USB in my pocket, counting down the seconds. Maya gave the signal. Now, I slipped into the control room, affecting my sister's nervous gait, and handed the drive to the audio technician, a contact Maya had discreetly secured. "Play this right after her speech," I whispered. He just nodded, completely unaware of the bomb I had just armed. Eleanor's speech ended to a wave of thunderous applause. The house lights dimmed for the closing video montage, and I held my breath. The massive speakers crackled for a second. Then her voice, raw and venomous, filled the vast hall. "I own you, Amelia. No one can save you." The crowd froze. A ripple of confused murmurs spread through the seats. The recording continued, her threats echoing off the high ceilings. "Disobey me, and I will ruin your life." Faces began to turn, eyes wide with shock and disbelief as the ugly truth stripped Eleanor bare in front of her entire industry. I watched from the shadows, my pulse racing as Eleanor's perfect composure finally shattered. She lunged for the microphone on the podium, her face a mask of pale fury. "You traitor!" she screamed, her voice shaking with rage. "You dared to record me." The crowd gasped. Her own words were a confession, louder and more damning than the audio itself. I stepped out from the wings, my sister's timid mask gone, and met her furious gaze from across the stage. "Thank you," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying in a sudden, dead silence. "You just confessed." Her eyes widened, the full realization of what had just happened hitting her like a physical blow. The room was utterly silent, every eye locked on her as Maya's camera captured it all, its little red light a steady, unblinking witness. Eleanor stammered, her hands flailing uselessly. "It's a lie, a fabrication." She shouted, but the crowd was no longer hers. Reporters were scribbling furiously in their notebooks, investors were whispering urgently to each other, and the air grew thick with judgment. Maya moved swiftly, signaling security while dialing the police on her burner phone. I stood my ground, the weight of my sister's pain and years of fear fueling my resolve. Eleanor's gaze locked onto me, her fury palpable. "You will pay for this," she hissed, but her power was crumbling around her, her threats suddenly hollow. Uniformed officers entered through the side doors, their radios crackling. Maya handed them a prepared file, printouts of the text messages, photos from the USB drive, and a transcript of the recording. "She's been abusing her employee, who is also her stepdaughter," Maya said, her voice calm but firm. "This is the evidence." Eleanor tried to bolt, shoving past a guard, but they caught her arm. "This is a mistake," she yelled, her polished facade completely gone, replaced by raw desperation. The cuffs clicked shut around her wrists, and the crowd watched, stunned, as she was led away. I finally exhaled, my legs trembling, the victory feeling strange and bittersweet. The hall erupted into chaos, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing in my face. Maya pulled me aside, her hand a steady presence on my shoulder. "You did it," she said, her eyes fierce with pride. "She's done." I nodded, but my thoughts were already with Amelia, safe in Lakewood, completely unaware of the public detonation of our lives. I had won the battle, but her scars remained, and I knew the road ahead was long. As the crowd began to disperse, I slipped out a side exit, the city lights blurring around me. Eleanor's arrest was a form of justice, but it wasn't closure. My sister needed time. She needed healing. She needed a life completely free from fear. I had risked everything to give her that chance, but the weight of her trauma still lingered in my chest. I walked toward my car, the USB drive still in my pocket, a small, hard symbol of the fight I had carried for her. The war wasn't over, not really. But tonight, we had finally struck back. 1 month later, the trial put an end to everything. The Cleveland courthouse was stark and imposing, its wooden benches packed with reporters and curious onlookers. Eleanor sat at the defendant's table, her once impeccable power suits replaced by a plain blouse, her face sallow and hollowed out. The judge read the verdict, guilty of coercion, assault, and unlawful surveillance. Her company was to be liquidated, her assets frozen, her name erased from the world of publishing she had so ruthlessly built. I stood in the gallery beside Amelia, her hand gripping mine tightly. When Eleanor's eyes met ours, they were filled with a pathetic, impotent spite. In response, Amelia simply raised her chin, her gaze steady and, for the first time in years, completely fearless. That single, silent moment of strength was worth more to me than any prison sentence. After the gavel fell, we left the courthouse, the crisp autumn air feeling sharp and clean against our skin. Amelia didn't speak much, but I could see the change. Her shoulders were lighter, her steps firmer. She had started therapy, diligently working to reclaim the pieces of herself that Eleanor had tried so hard to shatter. A week after the verdict, she went back to an old job she loved, working with children at a community arts center in Cleveland. I visited her there one afternoon, watching as she laughed while helping a little girl paint a sprawling, colorful mural. Her smile, so bright and unburdened, was a victory no courtroom could ever grant. She was rebuilding, not just surviving. And for now, that was more than enough. I drove out to Lakewood to see Aunt Carol, and this time, Amelia joined me for a quiet dinner at her cozy house. The table was set with all her favorite dishes: roasted chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, and warm apple pie. We sat close together, the warmth of the meal wrapping around us like a shield against the past. Amelia spoke about her plans, her voice full of a quiet excitement I hadn't heard in years. Maybe she would teach art full-time. Maybe she would travel somewhere new, somewhere far away. Aunt Carol listened, her eyes soft, and squeezed my sister's hand. "You're free to choose now, honey," she said, her voice steady and reassuring. I nodded, my heart feeling full for the first time in a long, long time, knowing that we had carried each other through the storm and made it to the other side. That night, back in my own apartment, I opened my journal, its pages worn and creased from months of worry. I wrote, my pen moving with a clarity I hadn't felt before. It wasn't the legal justice, but the sight of my sister standing tall that had truly eased my heart. The words anchored me, a final record of why I had fought so hard. Eleanor was gone, her influence severed like a rotten thread. There would be no dramatic reconciliation, no final, tearful words. She had lost her power over us, and we had made the conscious choice to move forward, leaving her shadow behind. My sister's own strength, not the letter of the law, was the true resolution to our story. The weeks that followed were gentle, a slow and quiet healing. I returned to my data analysis work, finding a strange comfort in the clean predictability of numbers. But my thoughts often drifted to my sister, to the bright-eyed children she taught, to the new life she was carefully carving out for herself. We talked on the phone often, our calls filled with the small, simple joys we had been denied for so long. A new art project, a funny story from Aunt Carol, a plan to visit the museum. The fear that had once choked the air between us was fading, replaced by a quiet, steady hope. We weren't the same people we had been before all this, but we were closer, bound by a love that had outlasted unimaginable pain. One evening, I sat out on my balcony, the lights of the city sprawling below me like a blanket of scattered stars. I thought about the lesson we had learned, the one I would carry with me forever. Not everyone who shares your face or your history shares your heart. In the end, we had chosen love over fear. My sister and I, twins in appearance, had been forced to walk vastly different paths. But our bond, the one true thing in our lives, had held firm. We had faced down a woman who thrived on control, and instead of breaking, we had built something stronger in the wreckage. That was our real triumph. Not the spectacular fall of an empire, but the quiet, resilient rise of two sisters who refused to be defined by anyone else's cruelty.